Last week, the second week of Pentecost, we commemorated all the saints from various lands, being the period when we go and continue with fruitful work in the mission for our Lord Jesus Christ as he commanded before he went up into the heavens. This week, on the third week, we also continue with that theme, but this time the concentration is upon the various martyrs of the various lands. Martyrs. What are martyrs? That is, martyrs for the faith. In many respects, the martyr is the highest of all saints, in the sense that one has been laying down their life for the truth, for Christ. And when you look at all the saints that we have in the calendars and elsewhere, the martyrs far exceed in number any of the other ones. In the time of the first 4 centuries, when the church was in catacombs and was persecuted, there were martyrs, and it's been calculated they were in the hundreds of thousands at that period. Then, when you go into the 20th century, between the times of the communist takeover of various lands, the martyrs that arose was not in the tens of thousands, but was in the millions, the tens of millions. The great author Solzhenitsyn made the point that during the 70 years of communism in Russia, for example, the USSR, 100 million were put to death. This is not counting wars or anything to that effect. And out of those 100 million, 60 million were put to death on account of their faith. That's a big difference to hundreds of thousands from the early church. Why did that happen? Our spiritual father explained it very well. And so did Father Seraphim Rose, his spiritual child. There was a clash that occurred in these communist times. The demonic realm raised up the biggest persecution against the church in order to see whether it could conquer it. And the martyrdom that resulted was the bloodletting from all of that. Yet, in the end, the church won. That was what we could call a militant aggression, a militant revolution against the church. But there is a much more subtle one coming, much more subtle one. Maybe you could describe it as the spiritual revolution against the church. There your enemy was very plain. They would come, they would take people away, they would persecute them, they would torture them, they would kill them, they would put them into gulags, make them slaves. But the spiritual terrorist that's coming is one that entices people to knowingly go with that unclean regime, with that demonic realm. And that's what's being forced upon us today as a precursor of it all. That idea where people will knowingly, willingly, and even with comfort, give themselves over spiritually to these sorts of things. The past few weeks have shown this quite clearly. Actually, I am shocked, totally shocked at how easily people are willing to give up their freedom. Just like that. You don't have to say much, just do it. Certainly in my days when I was young, there would have been a revolution against something like that. No one would have accepted that. But slowly these freedoms that we have been cut down further and further and further, to the state where now all the authorities have to do is issue a word and everybody bows down straight away, irrespective of whether it is unto godliness or not. That's the sort of thing that we're going to face in the future. A comfortable revolution, a comfortable one where they will provide for you all your comforts of life, the appliances that you need, the material goods that you need, the food that you need, the housing that you need, as long as you bow down to them, just like that. And when you do, what's the consequences? They'll take away your freedom to worship, to come to church. They'll take the sacraments, to do anything that is pleasing to the Lord. They'll take away from you the knowledge of what's really going on and what they expect of you. And you'll be just like a robot. That's the whole sort of agenda that they are working towards. And if you don't believe me, do some research. Find out for yourself, because that's the way things are going in the world. Going back to these martyrdom. Without the martyrs, we can't even have the Eucharist. Because in order for the priest to serve the Eucharist, he has to serve it on the relics of martyred saints. These are enclosed in a winding sheet, the shroud of Christ, which I'll show you in a moment. And in it are the relics of martyr saints. For example, the one that we have is actually called an antimince. And it's the shroud of Christ, of his burial, stamped and signed by the bishop who gave it to you. But here are sewn in the relics of martyr saints. In our case, we have St. Basil the Confessor and St. Anastasius the Persian, all ancient saints. Without that, we cannot serve the Eucharist. And each priest, once they're ordained, are given an antimince similar to this, with martyr saints, on which they keep in the altar table, and only they are allowed to handle that, or anybody that's ordained, and on that must be served the Eucharist. Why is it that it's so incredible that these martyrs are the ones that are put forward for us all the time? Well, like I said to you, it's very simple. It's because that is the height of holiness, to give your life over. There are many instances where a person who has never even thought about the Lord, never was Orthodox or anything like that, instantly became a saint. We have that first example with the thief on the cross, who, even though he was initially blaspheming the Lord like the other one, realized his unrighteousness, repented and confessed, and the Lord took him into the heavenly realm as the first person there, the first one. Isn't that amazing, the thief on the cross, or the malefactor? There are others, like, for example, I've put some icons out of the 40 martyrs of Sebastien, where these young youth soldiers were being forced into icy water to be martyred on account of their faith. One of them chickened out, ran out, but one of the soldiers that was doing this saw this faith, took his spot. He was never a Christian initially, but there you go. That water became to him his water of baptism, and that giving up of his life for Christ straight away got him into the kingdom of heaven. That's the way the martyrs are for you. We also have some very important ones here in Australia. Today, on this Sunday, is the 40th anniversary of the slaying of our spiritual father, Vladimir, of, yes, 30, but it was the 29th when he was hit by the car. He was going to church on Sunday morning, early. Apparently a KGB set up a large vehicle to ram him. It was along White Horse Road, I believe, around near Box Hill. He rammed him, and the latest we heard was that he came to inspect the ram. He saw that Father Vladimir was still alive, and he finished him off at that point. So he murdered him. We always knew that there was a murder there, which was never investigated because it was counted as a road accident. But nevertheless, that wasn't the first attempt upon his life. And he was only 38 years old when that happened. He was essentially the first English language missionary in Australia. He died in 1980. The other one there, Metropolitan Philaret, whom I was a cell attendant for a little while, also had many attempts upon his life on account that he stood up for true orthodoxy. We knew that something suspicious had happened, and I investigated it also when I was with him and through his cell attendant, Father Nikita. What happened was there was some sort of dinner given for various hierarchs, and when Metropolitan Philaret went to his room, he died. The first one that went in there was Father Nikita, I think, and saw that there was a lot of vomit around the floor, which means he was poisoned. The next person that came in and told everybody else to leave was the current Metropolitan of the Russians in exile, Ilario, who we also know. He cleaned up that room and made it out as if Metropolitan Philaret reposed naturally, because he was already quite old, well into his 80s. And therefore there was no autopsy or anything like that. They just accepted it as being death due to old age, but actually he was poisoned. Another murder, and we know that it was through KGB agents, because when I was there at the synod, it was crawling with those sort of agents. And to this day, they continue their work in trying to blot out true orthodoxy, true Christianity. Yes, they allow the one that is controlled by the state, because that's fine for them, they can control that. But the other ones, the ones that are still trying for freedom, that are in catacombs or semi-catacombs like we are here, they try to block out. Even here we've had several visits from various suspicious people, which I won't go into now. So you see, this whole idea of martyrdom is a big thing in the church, because it is the height of one's spiritual life, to give over their life for their faith, for Christ. It wipes away all the sins that they may have had and committed, and all their unrighteousness. And even if they're an unbeliever, if they do it in the name of Christ, it gets them into the kingdom of heaven. So many that were shot, for example, I remember we were told that the bullets act like the baptismal water for those who confess their true Orthodox faith. That's something for you to think about and to read about, because most of the saints have been martyred, and most of the saints that we have in the calendar are from martyrdom. The others, of course, have reached holiness through their prayerful lives and life of asceticism, which comes down now to this other point. How does this martyrdom affect us? Well, we are in the midst of the Apostles' fast. That fasting is a point of martyrdom. We are martyring ourselves. We are rejecting from ourselves the passions that strive us to grope after material things, after pleasurable things, after all those sorts of things that are pleasing to the fallen human nature. We martyr ourselves from that. In order, why? Why do we do that? In order to become Christ-like. That's the whole reason for it. To become like the first parents, Adam and Eve, were before they fell. They had that special constitution. There was no death, there was no pain, no sorrow, no suffering. And that's what we strive for. Many people who call themselves Christians say that, oh, I believe and therefore I'm saved. Yeah, you believe and you're saved, right. So you can go and live any sort of life you like as long as you believe. What kind of belief is that? You know, we are given the tools to get to the kingdom of heaven, but how we use those tools is up to us. Just like I've said to you on many occasions, a carpenter's given tools to make beautiful things. If they don't make them, it's a waste, and that person only gets punished more for burying their talent, as they say, bury their talent and not using it wisely. Think about that in your own life. Consider those sorts of things, that you are very privileged to have the greatest of tools that anybody has, anyone that calls themselves Christian, because the Orthodox Church is the original church, the church that goes back to the very time of Christ, and even before in the heavenly realm when it was first established for the angelic realm. It was brought down to earth during Pentecost. And we continue with that unto this day. And bear in mind and be cognizant of the fact that we are heading for a much greater and a more subtle revolution against us from the spiritual negative side. And you need to work out how you are going to basically duck your way out of that, dodge your way out of that, so that you can still survive as a Christian and not give yourself over to those horrible authorities that want to enslave you and your families and everybody else. Let us say with our whole